Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chill Podcast with Dustin and Alex. Our guest today is Diana Lizette. Um,
Hello. Do you want to continue or should I?
uh, well, Diana is I think, interdisciplinary artist from Boulder, Colorado. I believe um, she goes to Naropa or went to Naropa. Do you want to introduce yourself and your practice?
Yeah. Hi. So my name is Yana Lizette. I graduated from Naropa this past summer in the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics. I studied creative writing and visual arts and a little bit of religious studies, attending Naropa University. I'm originally from San Antonio, Texas. So I think that huge part of my identity is still remaining, even though I live somewhere else. And I also think that reflects a lot in my work and written word as well. So yeah, I am an interdisciplinary artist, although I don't use that term too often. I kind of just use experimental artist most often, because for me, I believe like most of the art that I'm creating is more of an experience than a product or a result. And so, yeah, experimental seems also like a, something that I have hard time adjusting to and putting myself in. So, but I think that's the most reflective of what I do and continue to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that experimental and interdisciplinary, it's hard to sometimes come up with one word to like encompass something, especially because you work in a variety of mediums and everything. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about like which mediums you work in and
hmm Yeah. So I write poetry, I write fiction, I write prose, I write, yeah, I do a lot of writing and also I do installation work, I do performance art, I do paintings, I do sculpture, and film photography and films in general. So yeah, there's a bunch of mediums going around and it's so hard for me to just stay with one. It's always like wanting to explore the next one and, you know, work on something new. When I'm working on a painting, is like, oh, I need to take a break from a painting. Now I want to do film. So that's kind of how I ended up just picking up all of them, is like needing the break from one specific medium and finding another medium being able to give me that pause and that breather. Um, so yeah.
Um, do you feel like that's part of one larger process? And I was curious when you know you've reached a break in a certain medium.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a larger process because I also have a hard time defining when something is done. And I think sometimes I could be working on a painting and feel like I have exhausted it. And it's just like, okay, it's time to just say it's done. So then I'll pick up something else to do. And then after like months later, I realized that the painting wasn't done and I'll do something else to the painting. Um, so it's a huge process of navigating and like know its own and exist in the form that it does, and then find out, you know, months later that it still needs something else. Yeah.
Is that some art on the of your own on the wall behind you?
Yes, these are some of the. This is a painting here. Yeah, those are two paintings. There's a picture of Frida, and then I have this like tapestry word art thing that I did a couple years ago now. So,
Nice. So I assume Frida is a big inspiration.
yeah, she is. She's I'm not sure to say if she's the biggest inspiration, though I do appreciate the human she was when she was here in existence, and what she did for, especially for Mexican women in general, and what she represented for Mexican women during that time. So that specific identity that she carries is a huge influence.
What
That's
what other influences and what other artists do you draw inspiration from?
Yeah, a lot of right now, one of the biggest ones I have and have had is Cecilia Vicuna. She is a Chilean artist who was exiled from Chile when all that was the political corruption and everything that was happening in Chile, and she lives in New York City and has been working in the United States and became an artist known in the United States. And her work consists a lot of like indigenous roots that she comes from, and the earth in general, and like how to intertwine that back together into society that is modern now. But I've gotten to do a couple of like lectures and workshops with her in the past, and that has been really amazing to experience. Yeah.
That's awesome.
what did you take away from those?
Oh man, so much. And at the same time, like it was one of the first lectures that I saw of hers was a couple years ago. And then I did the summer writing program this past summer, and um there's something it was there's something in her voice that she could just say anything, regardless of what it is. She could just say anything, and it almost brings so much emotion to me. And I think the emotion that she brings out is like necessary for the world to like experience. And one of the things that I realized is a teacher, when we were in the lecture, like messaged me privately and was like, do you realize that you are part of this lineage, of her lineage, or part of what she is doing and is invoking, you already doing within your own work, but she's a huge influence for a reason. And I think that realization of knowing that, oh wow, I'm following the footsteps of someone who I admire so much, is always a good coming back to of like who I am and what I want to do, and realize the huge impact she has had on many artists. And especially being like, a Latinx artist, of like trying to carry an identity that is hard to sustain in a system that is trying to erase those identities most of the time. So yeah, she's been a huge influence in that sense of like, yes, I could remain in this body and remain who I am and still be able to have an impact in this world.
That's great. That's do you find that that lineage that you mentioned, it sounds like that's in one degree a very like cultural specific thing. Is it also an aesthetic lineage for you, or do you feel a different type of kinship outside of just the aesthetic?
Mm. I believe I contemplate on the word lineage often, and I think we tend to carry the very narrow definition of it to be like a blood lineage and what it means to carry your ancestors with you. And I think that's a huge part of my identity too, of like, yes, I do carry my ancestors, and then yes, I do feel connected to this blood lineage that I come from. But at the same time, there is the aesthetic lineage, and then there's also this like realization of like why you come back to these artists. And that's a whole different lineage that I don't really understand and cannot really define yet, but I will get there maybe one day. But it feels like that's, I don't know, it's just you already know who your people are and you kind of feel it. And I think that's a lineage in itself too. Mm-hmm.
Is it, you mentioned earlier being from Texas, and I was curious if you could expand more on how your identity sort of comes from that, and also like
Mm-hmm.
the, like, I guess, location of that and why that particular area means what it does to you apart from being born there.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good question. And I think so. I come from family from immigrants, and they migrated to from Mexico to Texas. And so Texas is a huge spot for most of my family who came to the United States for the first time. And I think that's why I carry it so much a part of my identity, is because this is the first piece of land that we existed outside our home, existed outside of like what we know and what we knew, and very traditional ways of being, are trying to be replicated in a land that isn't ours, but is ours,
Hmm.
and was ours. So it's a very complicated identity in that sense of Texas being this place that is home, yet it's like not that far away from our real home.
Hmm.
And in that sense, also, like one of the first, or my creative thesis manuscript is called Ruinas, which is ruins in Spanish, in English, I mean. And that manuscript consisted of like telling that story of, coming to Texas from Mexico, and telling that story of what it is to grow up in Texas. Because, as large as the Latino and Spanish speaking community is in San Antonio, which I really appreciated, that I grew up with so much culture around me, so easily accessible, because I know a lot of immigrants come to the United States and they can't find that community and don't have that community so easily ingrained within their everyday life. Um, and so that's why I think San Antonio has been a huge reason why I tend and always will keep my roots with me. But yeah, it's really interesting because I think part of my ancestors, even though they didn't come to Texas themselves, are still felt there and are still felt in San Antonio. One of the first things that my grandparents did, my great grandparents did when they came to Texas, was like work in this cemetery called Chapel Hill. And it's only like 45 minutes outside of San Antonio. But they were the groundskeepers for the cemetery, and they lived on the cemetery too. There's a small house there. So there's something about, just having these histories being written in Texas, even though there's so many stories that I don't know of back in Mexico. So like the beginning stories that I do know of and do carry from my ancestors who are very recent are in Texas. And I think that's why Texas is so important to me.
Um, it also sort of made me think about being in the lineage of that artist you mentioned, and her work being sort of political. Uh, if you consider any of your work to be political in terms of
Mm,
sort of land acquisition from like the
mm,
Mexican Wars, or anything like that. Like if you see that location being sort of a part of colonized land or, you know, anything like that.
Yeah. Um, I haven't dipped too much into that kind of work before. Um, in the political sense, though, I feel like there are subtle ways in which that comes out and arises in my work because there's some pieces that I've worked on films and stuff that are very specific to that. I know that I just did a film. Oh, the manuscript, the creative manuscript Renas, I made that into a film. So that kind of is showing a reflection a little bit of like the colonization that is happening. I went to a protest at the ICE detention center in Aurora, and I filmed some stuff when I was there. And one of the things that some of the protesters did was remove the ICE flag and remove the American flag from the pole and like took it down, and then they put a Mexican flag up, which is really interesting because in a sense this was, you know, Mexico at some point. Like these like lands, like Texas especially, was like a huge part of, you know, of Mexico. And so having those subtle things arise and not being so specific about them, I think is the way I navigate through some political statements and what I'm trying to say politically. One, I think it was Sam Gilman who said that abstract art is political. And so that's like another thing that I really have been sitting with and have been, you know, contemplating, because there's sometimes like this urge to really make more of a strong political statement. And then I do have those instances where I do that, but then there's other moments where I'm like, what I am doing and what artists are doing is already political. Like we are already existing in this place that we're trying to reorder and construct something that is away from what we are expected to do, and exist and expected to exist in. So I try to sit with that a lot too.
That's
That's
interesting.
yeah, that's a nice way to look at that. Can you talk a little bit more about like that quote you brought up, the abstract art being political? Do you think
Mm-hmm.
that is more so true with abstract art rather than, I guess, figurative art or narrative art? Is there something inherently political about the abstract to you?
Um, I think what is political in the abstract for me is that because I tend to do more abstract stuff when it comes to paintings more, and some installations are very abstract as well. Um, it feels like I said earlier, it's just something that is already in the sense of like what is arising for me now is like the form of being uncomfortable. I don't know why, but that is what I'm like gonna start talking about. But because you're looking at something you don't know and you don't know what it is, and you're like so intrigued by it and are questioning and creating a dialogue that you really don't understand and don't know how to relate to an object because you've never seen anything like it before, but also because it's not tangible for you. I feel like that, in a sense, is political. I don't know. Yeah, and so I feel like abstract art does that so often for so many people.
Yeah, definitely.
Hmm.
I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about the process of adapting your creative manuscript into a film? You mentioned that briefly, but it'd be great to hear a little bit more about what taking your writing and moving it into another medium is like.
Yeah. Um, so I do that often. I work on a manuscript or I worked on something and then convert it into a visual thing because in that sense it's another form of translation. Um, I work a lot with translating from English to Spanish, Spanish to English, and for me there's a new thing of like really being able to do the same thing with visual and text. I did write a whole critical thesis on image and text, and I think I just always been like a huge admirer of the relationship that could exist within them. And so taking a creative manuscript, Rena's, and then making that into a film, I really didn't necessarily know where exactly it was going to go. And I had the idea since I started working on that manuscript that, you know, we were supposed to present our thesis a specific way, and a lot of people just read them and just like present them, you know, live in that way. But then the whole pandemic hit, and there was also like this thing of like, oh, you can't, we're not going to present our thesis. Like that's not something that's going to happen. But then I was like, wait, but I still want to present my thesis. And I had said that I was going to do a performance, and I had said that possibly I will do a film. And then it kind of just came more naturally to do a film because we weren't allowed to like be with one another in a space, and like a performance isn't the same thing recorded. And so the film just came more naturally of like, yes, the film will still be able to invoke what I'm trying to invoke and anybody's screen. And so the film came, and I had collected film from summer 2019 all the way from summer to 2020. And so it was a year of collections of films. And I didn't know. And when I film, I just like start filming anything that I find very interesting. And I had those shots from the protests. I had shots from other protests that I ended up going to on the summer 2020. Then I had shots of like, there's this building that I live across from that kept changing. They painted it black, and it was these amazing colors. They like completely deconstructed the inside, and like we're just rebuilding it. And so I was filming this building as they were like doing this thing to it and like making it a new thing. And also I go and visit a tree often down Pearl Street. And so I recorded that tree as well. And so it was just a collection of a lot of random moments, and also a collection of like returned moments that I keep coming back to. And so yeah, I finally got all the films together, and then I started working on narrating and deciding which pieces of the manuscript I was going to add to the film, because I had so many. I mean, the manuscript itself is like 60 something pages. And so I was like, I know I'm not going to make an hour long film. It's going to be way shorter than that. And so narrowing down the pieces of writing that I was going to say to narrate the film was kind of hard. And I mean, I just like, you wanted every piece to be in it. But at the end of the day, editing and putting it all together, it kind of just becomes a zone and a flow that I don't really think about anything else. And also it just like I naturally finished the film in one night, you know? And so it wasn't something that I overthought, or it like was like, oh no, this doesn't work or anything. It kind of just like was pieced together in like one night. And then the next day I had to present. I was like, okay, I'm presenting and this is it. So yeah, there is a lot of process that goes into it, and it's very detailed, yet at the same time it's like the easiest thing to do sometimes. Yeah.
To me, it seems like kind of a like meta thing as well.
Mm.
Like taking all of these shots that you collected over the years and then putting them into one thing and having to leave behind so many different things, so you're like left with ruins of
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
And like I kind of wonder more. I wonder about the why you chose that title. Again, I'm not sure if you
Mhm.
explained it
Yeah.
more than.
No, I love that you mentioned that, the things that I still left behind, because um I just like love fragmentation a lot, and that was like a huge reason of why. I mean, the manuscript itself is very fragmented. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not supposed to. And there's a lot of things that are left behind within the manuscript itself. Um, and ruins for me came naturally because, I mean, I don't live in San Antonio, but every time I go back home and visit and stay for a while and be around places, I mean, I grew up and lived there my whole life since I was 18 years old. I didn't know any other place besides that. And every time I revisit San Antonio, I remember, and the city itself has a lot of ruins for me. The old house I grew up in, and the old, all of those places for me are ruins. And I think, and that's why the title came to be. When I started working the on the manuscript, I went home for a weekend to do some research and ask my family some questions and ask my great grandmother some questions. She is still alive, and so I, ask her about specific stories of my great grandfather and just ask her these things. And the more, and even the cemetery that I mentioned earlier, like 3 of my family members are buried at the cemetery. And
Mm,
even then, also, that cemetery itself is a ruin for me and ruins for most of my family. Um, and so, yeah, that's why the title came to be.
that's nice.
Mhm.
Um, I sort of also wonder about ruins, like if there's a way that it can be total, like that everything could be considered a ruin, and how that sort of like like forces us into impermanence and to consider that. And
Mhm.
I wonder if that's connected at all to going to Naropa, which is sort of a famously like Buddhist college.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I love impermanence. And it really does reflect on most of my work, is like this idea of something not being permanent and not being able to exist in the form that it is now, because it will consistently be transforming into something else. Um, and I like to say that Naropa did give me a lot of those values, and it did. And so I have to give it credit for that. But it also, I think those values are ingrained into the being, um, because of experience, and also because you choose to have those ideas stay with you, um, because they do something. And they also, the idea of impermanence and decay hugely reflects a lot in my old work and sometimes in my new work. And there's this phase where I kind of just was impermanent, and this is all I'm going to write about. There's nothing else I'm going to write about but this, and even then, like, forcing myself to just be in this state was like, oh, am I trying to make this space and this time permanent now? So it's just a funny dialogue within impermanence and permanence and decay in life at the same time. And I think Naropa did influence a lot of that. Hmm.
So, so now that you've completed your thesis and presented it at Naropa, what's next for you? Do you have any? Sorry if that's too personal or too looming of a question, but what do you have anything big on the horizon now that you've finished that?
Um, That is, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a really hard question to answer, but I think after graduating, I definitely was in this space of like, what do I do? I hadn't known anything. I didn't know art outside of school. That was like another thing that I needed to like really work with is like, how do I bring this outside? And how do I build a community that was so heavily ingrained within the system of like being in an academic setting? How do I bring that outside of that setting? And I think that's something I'm still learning how to do. I've been working um, and doing some work for this writing organization called Gemini Inc. It's a writing nonprofit in San Antonio, Texas that does writing workshops and stuff. So I've been not fully hosting them, but like inviting other writers and participating in those. And this and this specific organization focuses on writing workshops for underprivileged school districts in San Antonio, youth and correctional facilities, and also young girls and mental hospitals. So it's a different community for sure, but I've been extremely appreciative of it, and it's been a really great experience of like just tapping into that kind of social work, because at the end of the day, like that's what I want to do. I just want to do social work in the sense of like what art can do socially for people. So that's something I plan to continue to do. I'm doing a couple of mentorships. I'm working on a body of work right now that consists of the body. And that is coming in installations, film, photography, paintings. I'm doing some paintings, and yeah, that collection, and oh, and writing. I'm also doing some writing and I started a manuscript for that. So that's just like the heavy focus that I have right now. It's just like continue creating, and eventually the idea and the goal for me is like to have this body of work in the gallery maybe at the end of the year. Once I'm actually finished everything, I'm working with a mentor right now and like writing proposals and doing all that other stuff that you have to do. So that's been exciting. So yeah, I mean, the idea is just to continue creating, even though I don't have specific deadlines for anything. And then I'm not expected to be graded on anything, but just to create, because I mean, I can and I'm doing it. So yeah.
What has the mentor relationship sort of brought to your practice and
Yeah.
process right now?
Yeah. Mentorship is really important. And that necessarily doesn't have to come from like an authority figure. And it doesn't necessarily have to come from someone who has more experience than you. Um, that's what I have truly felt. And I feel like a lot of my artist friends in general are those mentorships and are those influences to continue to create. I mean, the fact that I could have a friend critique a piece of for me is like a huge privilege and benefit as an artist. Like that's what you want to have. You want to have those people in your lives who are going to help you move forward and who could push you still to have more potential than you're expecting yourself to have. So yeah, having a mentor in that sense is really important. I also meet with this um her name's Andrea, and I've been meeting with her, and she's been just like extremely helpful for me and doing this mentorship program with her also has been like extremely beneficial. But as an artist, I think we need any type of support that we can get ourselves, and it's really important to have that.
Sure. I was curious where you're at in your process right now. Like, if you wanted to walk us through like a day or a week of the actual art making that you do in a day.
Yeah. Yeah, I could talk about yesterday. Yesterday was a
Yeah.
art making day. So I love waking up early in the morning when no one is awake. And so I will wake up at those hours and try to do, the first thing is writing. I like to write whatever, especially if I had a crazy dream the night before. I love to start getting started with that. But also, they're very slow mornings and they're very quiet. And for some reason, I love to listen to the saddest music that early. And so I'll start listening to music and start writing. Sometimes it's just the thoughts from last night of the dream, or sometimes it's just like what I'm going to do for the day, or sometimes it's a poem. And those kind of just come by themselves. I try not to force them too much. And so yesterday I did that in the morning, kind of ended up laying around for a bit. Organizing my desk is a very important thing to do, especially when I'm going to start some writing. So I try to do some organization there. Then I move on to sketching if I can. And I started a sketch yesterday of two birds, and after sketching it's, breakfast or something, and that's the ritual of also including like meals and cooking as part of the art process, because I think anything is art, and cooking is like a huge form that I've been exploring for a while now. And so I started making breakfast and just like ritualistically, and then in that place of creativity, I made flatbread. That was another thing. And then after that, I knew for the rest of the day that I was going to be photographing, because I met up with my friend Edie, who's a photographer, and we left around noon to go take pictures. And that experience itself was very ritualistic as well. We ended up going to Salt Hill Ponds. I don't know if you guys have ever been to that
Yeah, I've
trail.
been there.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's
Mhm.
amazing. It's very magical. So we went there yesterday, and we kind of discussed prior to meeting up what exactly we wanted to convey and what exactly do we want to work with. And I think a lot of the film that I've been doing recently has been this black and white, and it's like fragmentation of body. So it's like just like a hand or the head or something like that. So it's fragmentation body parts. And I've been photographing those in black and white. And so yesterday I got black and white film, and I was like, okay, well then this is kind of where I've been at, and this is where I've been working in this like theme of fragmentation within black and white film. So I'm just gonna continue that. So we went to the Salt Hill Ponds and like played in the mud. There was mud there, and picked up sticks and did a lot of like walking around with them, and did a lot of like just like being with the land itself. And I think working with this body work that I'm doing of like sketching the body, studying the body, researching artists who have done similar work before in the past, like Ana Mendieta, who did amazing work with earth, body, and just like hiding her body within, camouflaging herself to be part of like the ground and the earth. And so we kind of were navigating those ideas, and um yeah, that ended up being part of the whole art day, basically, of a couple hours of just shooting whatever came and arose. And it's very interesting, especially when you're shooting in nature. At least for me, it's more of like I don't really know what I'm gonna do, but something's gonna call me towards it. And if that's a log, that's like, oh, sit in this log, or pick up this stick, or sit underneath these like branches and then like shoot from above or shoot from below, it's like, then we're going to do it. And so it's a very natural, intuitive, maybe, process when it comes to that.
That's great. That's it's exciting to hear that like you're like in a day you work in so many different mediums. You had a photo shoot and drawing and writing all at once, and I think the idea of that being a fairly intuitive thing makes a lot of sense. Do you find that, like, after a day of that, like, so with a busy day like that yesterday, today, do you start from the same place, from the same routine, or is today more of a, like, recuperating from all of that creative work day? Or I guess maybe a better or more sensible question would be, what percentage of, like, your days are that full of creative work versus days of rest and letting things stew?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Also, something that I've been tracking, because my mentor was like, I need you to start tracking the day of rest and then your days of creativity, and like the hours of creativity, and like, why are you feeling more creative today than yesterday? And it's just a practice that we're doing just to keep up with some things. But I felt yesterday was like one of the, I mean, I'm in those spaces often. I'm in those spaces of creativity all day, often. And then there's like days that I'm not whatsoever. And I can't, because I also have a full-time job that is outside of my art practice, as every artist does, and has to have. And so sometimes that job takes over so much of my energy, but I try to not say that what I'm doing in that job is not creative at all. So it's like this reworking and reintroduction and like a narrative of like, oh, wow, I'm not creating today. Then I'm gonna, I'm starting to feel like a little bit shitty about that because, oh my God, like I'm supposed to be creating all the time. So it's also this idea of like, what is creation? Yes, creation could be a painting. Yes, it could be a photograph, but also creation of like just a laugh that you shared with a student earlier, or like creation of like, because I'm a teacher assistant for special education at Boulder High, and so I do that 40 hours a week. And I think also teaching reading and math and stuff is also being creative. And so there's a lot to do with, there's a lot of like relearning that and relearning what creativity is, because it necessarily doesn't have to be a product at all. And so yeah, I don't know, I find myself being in those spaces as much as I can, and if anything, when I am in those spaces, I'm fully nourished. And that's why I try to be in those spaces of creativity, is because that is feeding me something that I don't get as often as I would like to if I didn't have a 40-hour week job, but I do. And so it's important to come back to those spaces. So, and sometimes you're like, oh my God, I'm so tired and I can't be in those spaces so often, because those spaces do take a lot of energy as well. But I think cooking also has been a huge one of like, you know what, I'm just going to cook today. And that's already part of my process for creating. So yeah, trying to look at everything as we are creating all the time.
Yeah, I like the idea of what you create not having to be a product, and that makes me think about raises a question for me, like, what's your relationship to social media and art? Because I feel like social media kind of compels you to present whatever you make as a product, at least personally. But
No, yeah, that is a question that I'm consistently being asked. And I just had this good discussion yesterday with my friend Edie at dinner after the photo shoot. We were talking about Instagram itself, and then a friend texted me about it too, which is so weird. But she was like talking we were talking about it in the sense that there is this sense of product that we're displaying on social media, and it's like, oh, I finally finished something, so it's going to be on, like, I'm going to put it on display, or it's a form of validation that I did something because I posted about it, you know. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, and it's a really complicated relationship that, I mean, it's taken me years to like learn and navigate what exactly I want from Instagram, and how do I want Instagram, and like what does Instagram even do for me, and I think there's also this sense of fabrication that can occur within Instagram, and how so many people are like, oh, this is like the whole entire truth of your being, and this is you as a being, or this is your art as a being, and stuff like that. And I'm not necessarily saying that those truths can exist within those aspects of Instagram, but I don't think it's reality in itself, and I don't think it will always or never really be able to capture that, and I'm completely okay with that thought. I also have navigated my relationship to Instagram that it's mine, it's no one else's. And so if I'm posting something, it's for me. And it's for, and I know that the reason why I continue to use Instagram is to like have a curation of my work. So everything's curated as anybody else's Instagram is curated. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think as artists, we learn how to curate our work. And as long as it's something that you feel more aligned to, and you experience it as your own and nobody else's, then I think it's really important to carry that thought moving forward, and posting about your art and posting about yourself in general too, is like knowing that it's yours and no one else's. um and anybody can pick it up and have a different experience of a film that I made and relate to it in a whole different way, and I think that's really exciting to witness. And I think it's really exciting to connect with artists on Instagram. We were able to do this because we connected on Instagram, and so there's that relationship to it too, of like being able to connect with one another because it's there. Um, so yeah, it's a really complicated relationship, and I go back and forth with it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's nice to hear like other folks just talk about how it's complicated and that the pros and cons both exist. I feel like sometimes I feel like a pressure to either embrace or condemn the thing. So it's really nice to hear you just sort of build your own relationship for it and only use it to the extent that it serves you, it sounds like. And I think that's probably one of the healthier approaches a person can have to it.
Mm-hmm.
For
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
It kind of makes me think about, there's like that, I don't know how much of it is a myth, but the idea that when photography was first invented, people were afraid of it because they thought it captured like a part of their soul or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think Instagram is in sort of the same spot of
Mm-hmm.
invention where people are like, I wonder if it's sort of taking away some sort of essence of me, or like
Yeah.
capturing it. And it's also just kind of like a massive surveillance thing as well, like that is weird. But
Yeah. 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 It's so funny. My great grandma refuses to ever look at the camera because she does firmly believe that the
she has
camera is
that, huh?
doing, yeah,
Yeah.
that the camera's doing that to you. It's taking away your soul. And at the same time, in that relationship, and I completely respect that she doesn't smile or does ever look at the camera. That's the way of being, and I respect anybody else's ideas of the camera and
Hmm.
Instagram in general. But I think also where I come to this, the idea is like, if we allow something to take away from us, we're allowing it. And so it's like whether or not it's your decision of like Instagram is going to make me feel this way. And it's so easy for it to make you feel really bad. And I've been in those states of it making me feel really bad. But also, I've decided that, you know what, if I'm going to continue using this app and this way of surveillance and this way of, existing in social media, then I'm going to have to rework my relationship to it for it to not be taking anything away from me or making me feel a certain way.
Yeah,
That's great.
I like that a lot.
That's great. Not to double back too much, but have you photographed your great grandmother a lot? Is that a point of tension for the family, or
She has been photographed in a lot of family stuff. I've never personally photographed her. As soon as you said it right now, I was like, wow, I should definitely photograph her. But I also don't know how comfortable she would be with that, slash also how willing she would be for it. Um, I do photograph a lot of my family members when I go back home, and it's kind of more of like a natural. It's never been portraits of I'm me like saying, "Oh, I'm going to take a portrait of you today." It's always been in their kind of like their natural state of just being in the kitchen or being outside or something like that. I think it's really important because I mean, we have like so many family photos, and they're all prints, but now everything is digital. So those prints don't exist as often anymore. And so I'm one of the only ones with a film camera in the family. And so I get those prints developed. And I'm like, there still needs to be those physical copies of photographs to be passed down. Like, why did we stop doing that? I think it was wonderful. And so I try to continue doing that. And that's why I try to take as many pictures as I can of my family. But now I'm just like, wow, I need to go home to Texas and do a photo shoot of my great grandma.
that's great. I guess to just jump off that question a little bit. You'd mentioned earlier too the ways in which talking with your family and their family memories and stories and stuff have informed a lot of your creative work.
Mm-hmm.
Do you show it to them afterwards? Is that a thing that you all share, or is it sort of is their contribution to it enough that you don't need their feedback on it, or what is their relationship with your work?
Yeah, it took really a long time. I think it took almost 4 years of working on a piece and pieces to eventually me sharing with them. A couple years ago now, I think it was in 2018, but I was living in San Antonio during those months, but I was asked by a friend if I could read a poetry reading. And this was going to be my first poetry reading in San Antonio. I've done poetry readings, but never at home in Texas. And it was kind of an interesting experience because I was like, oh, wow, like my community here, like, yes, I do have great friends. And yes, I do have artist friends as well in San Antonio. But most of my community here and everyday people is my family. So, like, how am I going to do something and then not invite them to it? And also, like, how am I going to like what would that night look like if they didn't come? Because we're in San Antonio. So they came for that poetry reading. That was the first time they ever had seen me read before. And it was like my mom and my uncles and my aunt, and they came to see me read, and it was just like a very interesting experience to have because I knew they were in the audience and I knew they were watching me and I knew that they were there, like I could see them. And then at the same time I kind of just like was like, they're part of everything else and they're part of an audience that I'm so willing to share my work with. And so that was a piece I first shared with them. And it was less about family and it was less about art history. So it was kind of easier to share. And then slowly, as the years progressed, And I was like starting to feel more comfortable as an identity of an artist too, of like, oh, I'm doing these crazy things and my family are seeing it on social media and they're like, what are you doing? Or what is this work you're doing? Like, this is very interesting and very odd and very out there. And the more acceptance I kept just showing them little parts of that, I was starting to feel more comfortable sharing my personal work, especially with my mom more than anyone. Um, so yeah, the Arena's creative manuscript was one of the first like very heavy topic, family heavy topic manuscript that I shared with my mom. And the feedback back from that was, I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot of like emotional stuff more than anything. And it wasn't like, why did you write this? It wasn't like anything like this is not true, because there's a lot of truths that could be existing in within a family dynamic, and not necessarily everybody carries it. And one individual can carry it. So it's a lot to navigate when you're sharing work with family, but I've been way more comfortable to share that type of work with them. Yeah.
That's great. That sounds like a really healthy dynamic to be able to have that back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose we'll wrap it up there. I wonder if there's anything else that you would like to share, if there's any ideas that came up that you want to put in there before we close up.
Not necessarily, but I mean, I wish I could have known a little bit what you guys are working on and what you guys are creating. And if there's anything like that you guys are wanting to share too, I'm always excited to hear what other people are doing.
For sure.
Thank you. Yeah, Alex, you just got a creative internship deal, right? I'm not sure if
Yeah,
it's
Yeah.
is it kosher to share that publicly?
I think
or-
so. Yeah, I mean, I'm a marketing intern for A2B2 magazine and
Mm-hmm.
the website. I think I'm on the visual arts team and the music team, and um, just kind of generally contributing ideas to that. I'm pretty excited about that because the person that like started it, Andy Morin, is sort of like a personal idol of mine. He's like the engineer and producer for the band Death Grips, and so it's cool to just be in the same space as him and a lot of other really talented and really creative people. And I was reading it in the magazine that the focus of it is supposed to be like he wants to try to turn it into a reverse university where like you basically get paid to learn things. Um, so I'm learn new skills, and so I'm super excited about that. Yeah,
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of the reverse university. That's a fun
yeah.
way to describe it. That's
Yes.
great. Well, thank you again, Deanna, for joining us. Are there any links we can send people towards? I know we talked about the mixed bag that is Instagram, but what's your Instagram, and do you have a website that people can find your work at?
Yeah, I was just working on, let me pull it up real quick. But I do have a portfolio, which, that's another thing that I think really helps with the relationship with the Instagram, is like having something away from Instagram and having other platforms that necessarily don't do the same thing that Instagram does. And anybody can browse to it. So I do have my portfolio. One of the last things that I uploaded there were the film photography that I took on my last trip to New Mexico. So those are
Nice.
there. Yeah. I just also want to say I really appreciate you guys taking the time and having a conversation. So thank you so much too.
Yeah. Thank you
Of
for coming
course.
on. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, we will make sure that there's links to your work down in the description of the video when this gets uploaded. And yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you guys.
Yeah.
All right, have a great day.
You
Yeah.
too. Take
You
care.
too.
Okay, bye.